I'm going to lift Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, and it reads, "But my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." That's Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. I'm entitling this, "He's a Wonder in My Soul." A lot of us will remember that old gospel song that was sang and still is sung in many of our settings. "He's a wonder in my soul." We've sang that for generations. But have you ever stopped to ask what that phrase or those words really mean? He's a wonder in my soul. When we call God a wonder, we're saying far more than God does wonderful things. We're declaring that God Himself fills us with awe. The longer we walk with Him, the more we realize that He cannot be contained by our understanding or explained by our reasoning. Every time we think we have Him figured out, He reveals another dimension of His wisdom, another depth of His grace. Every time we think that we've seen Him do what cannot be done, He displays another level of His power. And that's what Isaiah explains as he records the words from God. The prophet says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." And God is reminding His people that He is fundamentally different from us. And we often judge God by the limits of our own thinking. But God refuses to be confined by human logic. His wisdom is not simply a better version of our wisdom. It is on an entirely different level. The finiteness of our thinking limits our ability to fully understand God. That's why He is a wonder. When Isaiah records these words from God, we first see that His thoughts are beyond our thoughts. We tend to think in terms of what is visible, what is immediate, what is tangible, what is possible. But God thinks in terms of eternity. We focus on the present moment, but God sees the end from the beginning. We see obstacles where God always sees opportunities. We see impossibilities, but God has never stared at anything impossible. When Samuel visited the house of Jesse, he immediately assumed that Eliab would be Israel's next king because of his appearance. But God interrupted Samuel's thinking and said, "Man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart." God saw something that no one else could see. His thoughts were higher than Samuel's thoughts. How many times have we looked at a situation and concluded that there was no hope, only to discover that God has already been working behind the scenes? What appeared to be a dead end became a divine appointment because God was thinking thoughts that we could never have imagined. That's what makes Him a wonder. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. The second thing that Isaiah records from God is that his ways are far beyond our ways. Because not only does God think differently, he also works differently. Our whole approach to a situation is fundamentally different from God's approach. He works differently than we work. Because if we had written the whole story of redemption, we probably would have sent a conquering king to overthrow Rome, just as the Jews thought he would send a king to overthrow that wicked nation. But God did not send a conquering king as they would have anticipated or expected, or we would have sent. No, God sent a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes. If we had planned the salvation of the world, we would have chosen strength and authority, but God chose a cross. You know, if Mary had written the story of Lazarus, Jesus would have arrived before Lazarus died. Instead, Jesus delayed, allowing the situation to become impossible in the eyes of man so that the glory of God could be revealed. His ways are not like our ways. His methods often confuse us before they ever comfort us. Many times we want God to immediately comfort us, but what God will do initially is confuse us because his ways are not our ways. And sometimes we sit there in that confusion and we feel somewhat abandoned by God. But it's the process of confusing us that God is revealing his wonder. He's a wonder in my soul. His ways are not our ways. There are seasons when we pray for one answer and God responds in another altogether. At first, we wonder why he did not answer our prayer as we had requested. But later we discover that he answered it according to his perfect wisdom instead of our limited understanding. That's what makes him a wonder. He's a wonder in my soul. And then finally, his perspective is beyond our perspective. God sees at a level that we will never see. God says here in Isaiah 55, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. Isaiah reaches for the greatest distance his audience could even imagine, the distance between heaven and earth, and then says, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. It's almost like Isaiah and God are challenging us if we could measure the distance between heaven and earth. If we could come up with any kind of number, then we will be able to get some understanding of the magnitude of God being such a wonder. But since we cannot measure that, God's perspective is infinitely higher than ours. You know, in life, we see one page, but God sees the entire story. We see today's disappointments, but God sees tomorrow's purpose. We see Friday's cross, but God sees Sunday's resurrection. Because his perspective is higher, his purposes are greater than we can ever even imagine or comprehend. What appears to us as delay may actually be preparation, but we understand it from our perspective that we don't see what God is doing. We want to see it, but if we ever really see it, he ceases to be a wonder. What feels like denial may really be protection for us. What looks like defeat may become the very path to victory. Perhaps the greatest example of God's higher thoughts is found in the context of this particular chapter, because just before our text, Isaiah writes these incredible words: let the wicked forsake his way, and let him return unto the Lord. and he will have mercy upon him, for he will abundantly pardon. That's a wonder. Why would God abundantly pardon people who have rebelled against him? The answer comes immediately afterward, because his thoughts are not our thoughts, his ways are not our ways. That's what makes God a wonder. He's a wonder in my soul. He's a wonder in my soul. He's a wonder in my soul. Bless his name. I'm going to close with this by asking you a question. Has your relationship with God become merely familiar, or are you still amazed by him? The greatest tragedy is not that God ceases to do wonderful things or be wonderful, but it becomes tragic when we cease to wonder about him. He's a wonder in my soul.